The sun blazed mercilessly over the kingdom of Armenia, casting long shadows across the palace courtyard. A hush fell over the crowd gathered in the square, nobles, soldiers, and commoners alike, as they awaited a spectacle no one could quite believe was happening. At the center stood a man, battered yet resolute. His name was Bartholomew, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. Moments earlier, he had been dragged from the dungeons beneath the palace. His feet stumbled over uneven stones, his body weakened by days of imprisonment and torture. And yet, his eyes held no fear. What would make a man stand unshaken in the face of death? Why would someone endure unspeakable torment rather than utter a single word of denial? What truth could possibly be worth such a price? The answers to these questions lay not just in this moment, but in the journey that had brought Bartholomew here. A journey that began long before Armenia, long before prisons and royal decrees. It began in Galilee, in the quiet hum of fishing villages and dusty roads. Before we continue, take a moment to support this journey through history. If you're finding this story compelling, leave a like to help this content reach more people. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, and comment below which biblical figure you'd like to see in a future series. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive. Born as Nathanael in Cana, Bartholomew was a man of deep contemplation. Even before meeting Jesus, he sought truth beyond what the world offered. His encounter with Christ had changed everything. "I saw you under the fig tree," Jesus had said. A simple statement that pierced to the core of Nathanael's soul. From that day on, he became a follower, a witness to miracles that defied reason, and a love that transcended understanding. Years later, after Jesus' resurrection and ascension, Bartholomew's mission took him far beyond his homeland. He journeyed across distant lands, proclaiming the gospel in places where the name of Jesus was met with confusion or hostility. And now, that journey had led him to Armenia, where his message had shaken the very foundations of the royal court. It wasn't just words that stirred the kingdom, it was power. Bartholomew had prayed for the king's daughter, tormented by dark spirits, and she had been freed. Whispers of the miracle spread like wildfire. Many believed, but not everyone rejoiced. King Polemius embraced the gospel, but his brother Astyages, the high priest of the local gods, saw Bartholomew as a threat to both tradition and authority. "One foreigner will not undo centuries of worship," Astyages had declared. "If words won't silence him, blood will." And so a decree was issued. Bartholomew was to die, not quickly, but as a warning. As soldiers forced him to his knees, Astyages stepped forward. "You've poisoned the minds of my people," he spat. "Renounce this Jesus. Offer sacrifice to our gods, and your life will be spared." Bartholomew lifted his gaze, battered but unwavering. There is one God, and his Son is Christ. No blade, no fire can change that truth. Astyages' face twisted in rage. "Then you will die screaming." But Bartholomew smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but my soul will sing." The crowd tensed. The executioners approached, blades gleaming in the harsh sunlight. The sentence was clear. Bartholomew was to be flayed alive. Pain awaited. Agony beyond comprehension. And yet, as the first blade touched his skin, his lips moved in prayer. The air in the courtyard thickened with tension, every breath heavy with dread. The executioners, grim and methodical, prepared their blades with practiced precision. The crowd, drawn by both curiosity and horror, shifted uneasily. No one spoke. No one dared. Yet, through it all, Bartholomew knelt, his head lifted toward the sky, lips moving in quiet prayer. Moments before the first cut, Astyages stepped forward once more. "Last chance, foreigner," he sneered. "Renounce your Christ, and I'll spare you." Bartholomew's gaze never wavered. "I fear not the flesh being torn, but the soul that turns from truth. Do what you must." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Was it madness? Or was it something deeper, a conviction none of them could comprehend? The executioner glanced at Astyages, received a curt nod, and raised the blade. Pain exploded through Bartholomew's body as steel met skin. Agony beyond imagination tore at his nerves, but no scream escaped his lips. Instead, he began to sing. A hymn, soft yet clear, carried on trembling breath. The words spoke of grace, of love that death could not conquer. The crowd, expecting cries of anguish, stood stunned. How could a man sing through such torment? Each stroke peeled away flesh, blood pooling at his feet, staining the stones crimson. The executioners, hardened by countless deaths, found their hands trembling. They had never seen such defiance, or such peace. Memories flooded Bartholomew's mind between waves of agony. Walking with Jesus along Galilean shores, witnessing blind eyes opened, the dead raised. He remembered the warmth of fellowship, the final meal, and the risen Lord, commissioning them to carry the gospel to the ends of the earth. "To the ends of the earth," he whispered through clenched teeth, "even here, even now." Among the crowd stood King Polemius, face pale with conflict. He had believed Bartholomew's message. He had seen the healing of his daughter, proof no earthly god could provide. Yet political pressure and his brother's fury had cornered him into silence. Now, as blood darkened the ground, guilt gnawed at his heart. Was preserving his throne worth the price of this man's life? Minutes stretched into eternity. Flesh gave way to bone, yet Bartholomew's spirit seemed untouchable. Astyages' satisfaction twisted into frustration. "Why won't you curse us?" he hissed. "Why won't you break?" Bartholomew's eyes, glazed with pain yet burning with purpose, met his tormentor's gaze. Because love never breaks. The words struck like a blow. Astyages turned away, face darkening with something dangerously close to shame. The final cuts neared completion. Blood loss blurred Bartholomew's vision, but he felt no fear. Only peace, only purpose. He had run his race, fought the good fight, held the faith. And as darkness crept at the edges of his mind, his final prayer slipped into the air. "Into your hands, Lord." I commend my spirit. His body crumpled. His heart slowed. But the silence that followed was not one of defeat. It was one of awe. A man flayed alive, had died singing. And that, the people knew, was something no blade could carve away. Silence hung over the courtyard long after Bartholomew's final breath. Blood darkened the stones beneath him, but no amount of cruelty could erase the peace that lingered in the air. The crowd, once eager for a spectacle, now stood rooted in place, haunted by what they had witnessed. A man flayed alive, yet never broken, singing through pain, praying through death. Astyages turned away, anger simmering beneath his pride. "Burn the body," he snapped. "Let his memory turn to ash." But the executioners hesitated. Even hardened soldiers felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't an ordinary criminal. This was a man whose spirit refused to bow. Still, orders were orders. Wood was gathered, and soon flames crackled, consuming the remains. Smoke curled into the sky, but instead of carrying victory, it carried a question that burned in every heart. What kind of truth makes a man face death like that? King Polemius stood on the palace steps, face pale and drawn. His daughter, once plagued by darkness, stood beside him, eyes fixed on the flames. "He healed me," she whispered, "and we. Let this happen." The king's fists clenched. Political pressure had demanded silence. His brother's fury had demanded blood. But witnessing Bartholomew's unwavering faith gnawed at him. What kingdom was worth such guilt? That night, whispers spread through the streets. "He died singing," some said. "He never begged for mercy," others added. Children repeated the story in hushed tones, their parents shushing them, yet unable to stop listening. Astyages had sought to end Bartholomew's influence with a blade. Instead, he had carved the man's story into the city's memory. Days passed. The king's palace buzzed with tension. Polemius, restless, sought answers. If this Jesus he spoke of can give such peace in death, what does that mean for us? He asked his advisors. No one dared reply. Meanwhile, in the market squares and hidden chambers, those touched by Bartholomew's message gathered in secret. His words, spoken before chains and blades, echoed louder now than ever. Letters circulated, recounting his journey, his miracles, his unwavering love for the people, even those who sought his death. One night, a group of believers gathered where his blood still stained the stones. Lydia, a woman who had first heard Bartholomew preach weeks before his arrest, knelt and whispered, "He died so we could live free." A man beside her added, "They thought killing him would end this. But look, there are more of us now than before." The flayed flesh was gone, the body burned, but the seed was planted. Astyages, hearing rumors of underground meetings, ordered fresh crackdowns. Yet each arrest birthed more converts. Faith spread like water seeping through cracks in stone, unstoppable, persistent. In a final attempt to crush the movement, Astyages decreed, "Anyone found speaking of this man shall face the same fate." But instead of fear, something remarkable happened. More voices rose, more prayers echoed. The man flayed had become a symbol, not of defeat, but of undying truth. And as the kingdom of Armenia tried to bury his memory, Bartholomew's legacy rose higher than any blade could reach. Empires wielded swords, but his faith wielded something stronger, an eternal fire no execution could extinguish. Nights in Armenia grew colder, but the warmth of Bartholomew's sacrifice burned brighter than ever. His execution, intended as a grim warning, had become the heartbeat of a growing movement. Whispers of his final moments, the singing, the prayers, spread like wind through mountain valleys and crowded markets. Soldiers doubled patrols, but faith seeped through cracks no blade could seal. King Polemius found no peace. His chambers, once a haven, felt like a prison. He dreamt of Bartholomew, bloody, broken, yet serene. Nights passed with restless pacing, his conscience gnawing at him. "I let him die," he muttered to himself. "He healed my daughter, and I did nothing." His advisors urged focus on politics. Yet, no crown could quiet guilt. Astyages, meanwhile, fumed. Arrests surged. Believers were dragged into the streets, beaten and threatened. "Renounce this Christ," guards barked. Some recanted out of fear, but many, far more than expected, stood firm. "We saw what he died for," one woman declared through split lips. "You can't unsee truth." Desperate to regain control, Astyages sought to desecrate Bartholomew's memory. He ordered the site of the execution torn apart. "Erase the bloodstains," he commanded. "Burn every record of his words." But even as soldiers scrubbed stones clean, children whispered stories nearby. "He sang when they cut him," they told one another, "and he forgave them." In hidden rooms lit by flickering candles, the underground church flourished. converts gathered nightly. Lydia, now a voice among them, recounted Bartholomew's teachings. He said the kingdom isn't here or there, it's within. They can kill bodies, but souls belong to God. Heads nodded. Tears fell. Faith deepened. Polemius, racked with inner turmoil, slipped away from the palace one evening. Cloaked and unrecognized, he wandered to the execution site. Moonlight bathed the blood-scrubbed stones. Kneeling, he whispered, "If your God can forgive me, show me." Wind rustled trees above. Silence answered, but peace, strange and sudden, settled over him. Word of the king's secret visits leaked. Astyages raged. "He's been poisoned by that dead fool." Determined to crush remaining resistance, he ordered mass executions at dawn. "Fear is the cure," he declared. Dawn broke red over Hierapolis. In the square, rows of bound believers knelt. Lydia stood among them, head high, heart steady. "This isn't defeat," she whispered to the man beside her. "This is testimony." But just as swords lifted, Polemius arrived, flanked by guards. "Enough!" he roared. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Astyages' face twisted. "Brother, this is justice." "This is murder," Polemius cut in. "I've seen your gods heal no one. Bartholomew's God saved my daughter. His truth outlives his flesh." Chaos erupted. Soldiers hesitated. Villagers cheered. Astyages, face purple with rage, lunged, but guards restrained him. Polemius had spoken. The executions halted. That night, believers gathered beneath starlit skies. Lydia smiled through tears. He died flayed. But look what his blood grew. Cassius, standing nearby, added, "You can kill a man. You can't kill a movement." And across Armenia, in homes and hearts, Bartholomew lived on, etched not in stone, but in unyielding faith. Empires threatened, blades gleamed, fear roared. But truth sang louder. The aftermath of the halted executions rippled through Armenia like an earthquake. What was meant to crush the followers of Christ had only strengthened them. Whispers turned to conversations. Secret gatherings became open assemblies. And at the heart of it all, Bartholomew's name carried weight far beyond death. King Polemius, now publicly aligned with the believers, faced mounting pressure. His advisors warned him, "Rome will not stand for this rebellion of faith." But Polemius stood firm. "This isn't rebellion," he retorted. "It's truth, and I will not fight against what saved my family." Astyages, stripped of his influence, seethed. He retreated into dark alliances, sending word to Roman officials beyond Armenia's borders. "If my brother won't act, Rome will," he vowed. And indeed, letters carried tales of dangerous insurgents and seditious doctrines, reaching the ears of Roman governors who saw any disruption as a threat to imperial peace. Meanwhile, Lydia and the growing community of believers continued spreading the gospel. In villages once gripped by fear, people openly prayed and shared stories of Bartholomew's faith. His final words, spoken between cuts of the blade, became a mantra: "Love never breaks." Children sang hymns in the streets. Merchants offered supplies to traveling evangelists. What was once hidden flourished in daylight. But darkness loomed. Word arrived that a Roman delegation was en route, led by Governor Lucius, known for his ruthless suppression of dissent. Polemius gathered his council. "We must prepare," he said. "They won't come with words. They'll come with swords." Lydia spoke up. "Violence won't solve this. We stand by the truth, even if it costs us." Heads nodded. Fear lingered, but faith anchored them. Days later, the ground trembled beneath the march of Roman legions. Lucius, clad in gleaming armor, dismounted before the palace. "You harbor traitors, King Polemius," he declared. "Rome demands obedience. Renounce this so-called faith or face annihilation." Polemius stood resolute. "I serve my people's welfare. Bartholomew's teachings bring peace, not rebellion." Lucius sneered. "Peace that undermines Rome's authority is treason." He paused. "You have 3 days to comply." Tension thickened. Believers gathered that night, faces lit by torchlight. Lydia addressed them. "This isn't just about us. It's about what's right. Bartholomew didn't flinch at death. Neither should we." Cassius, a former Roman soldier turned believer, added, "They can crush bones. They can't crush truth." On the 3rd day, the city square filled with citizens and soldiers alike. Lucius stepped forward. "Final chance, Polemius. Bow to Rome or burn with your delusions." Polemius met his gaze. "My kingdom may fall, my crown may rust, but my soul belongs to Christ." Lucius's face darkened. "Then let fire speak." Siege engines rolled into place. Panic surged through the crowd. Lydia closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. Cassius clenched his fists, ready yet calm. "If this is the end," he murmured, "let it be for something eternal." Flames ignited. Chaos erupted. Yet through the smoke and shouts, voices sang, the same hymn Bartholomew had sung through agony. And above the inferno, amid collapsing walls and fleeing masses, faith stood immovable. Empires roared, swords flashed, fires consumed. But love never broke. Smoke curled into the sky as flames licked the edges of Armenia's capital. Siege engines battered the city walls, sending stone and debris crashing into streets once filled with peaceful gatherings and hymns. Panic gripped the citizens. Some fled, others huddled in prayer, while the Roman legion advanced with unyielding precision. Lucius, the Roman governor, stood atop a hill overlooking the chaos, his expression cold. "Bartholomew's death should have ended this," he muttered to his captain. Instead, it birthed a rebellion cloaked in faith. In the heart of the besieged city, King Polemius took cover with his council inside the palace. His daughter clutched his arm, her face pale. "Father, the people, they're terrified." Polemius clenched his jaw. "I brought this upon them," he whispered, "but I won't betray the truth to save a throne." Elsewhere, Lydia and Cassius navigated crumbling streets, guiding villagers to safety. Screams echoed. Dust filled the air. "Keep moving!" Cassius barked, his once soldier instincts driving him forward. Lydia paused, helping a child trapped beneath fallen beams. "We stand for peace, not war," she whispered, hoisting the boy free. As soldiers breached the gates, chaos erupted in the main square. Lucius marched forward, flanked by armored guards. His voice boomed. "Lay down your arms. Renounce this false faith, and Rome will spare you." Silence stretched. Then, from the battered crowd, an old man stepped forward. "We have no arms to lay down," he said. "Only truth." Lucius's eyes narrowed. "Truth doesn't stop steel." "Perhaps not," the man replied. "But your steel won't outlast eternity." Infuriated, Lucius ordered the arrest of all known believers. Cassius and Lydia stood their ground as soldiers closed in. "We knew this day would come," Cassius muttered. Lydia nodded. "If Bartholomew could sing through death, so can we." Dragged before Lucius, Polemius was forced to kneel. Bloodied but defiant, he met the governor's gaze. "You can burn buildings, you can silence voices, but you can't kill the truth." Lucius's patience snapped. Your defiance ends now." He raised his sword, and a trumpet blared in the distance. All heads turned. Another army crested the hills, mercenaries sent by neighboring kingdoms sympathetic to Armenia's plight. Confusion rippled through the Romans. "Reinforcements," Lucius growled. "Impossible." Chaos unfolded. Cassius broke free, tackling a guard. Lydia shielded villagers as arrows whistled overhead. Battle erupted, but amid the clash of steel, voices sang. Believers, facing death, lifted hymns to the sky. Flames raged, swords clashed, yet faith stood louder than war. Lucius, surrounded, spat curses. "You die for a dead man," he roared. Cassius glared back. "No, we live for the risen king." Hours stretched like eternity. Blood soaked the streets, yet when dawn broke, the fighting waned. Romans withdrew, defeated not just by swords, but by a people who refused to surrender their souls. Polemius limped through rubble, helping the wounded. Lydia found Cassius slumped against a wall, bloodied but alive. "We survived," she whispered. Cassius smiled through pain. No, truth survived. In the quiet aftermath, as smoke dissipated, children gathered around Lydia. "Will they come back?" one asked. Lydia glanced at the sky. "Maybe. But remember Bartholomew's words, love never breaks." And across Armenia, in shattered homes and battered hearts, faith burned brighter than any fire Rome could set. Empires rise, kingdoms fall. But truth endures. Dawn broke over a scarred Armenia, casting pale light over the smoldering remnants of battle. Streets, once vibrant with life, now lay strewn with debris. Broken carts, shattered pottery, and crimson stains marking the cost of defiance. Yet, amid the ruin, hymns still echoed, faint but persistent. Voices lifted not in mourning, but in gratitude. They had survived. Cassius leaned against a crumbled wall, his tunic torn and soaked with blood. Some his, some not. Lydia knelt beside him, binding a gash on his arm. "You fought like a madman," she muttered, though relief softened her tone. He managed to grin. "Madness or faith? Not sure there's a difference anymore." Around them, villagers worked to clear rubble. Children gathered salvaged supplies, their faces smudged with soot, yet eyes bright with resilience. In the face of annihilation, the people had chosen to stand. And now, they chose to rebuild. Polemius, battered and weary, addressed the gathered crowd in the town square. His royal robes hung in tatters, crown abandoned in the chaos. "We fought not for land," he began, voice hoarse but steady, "but for freedom of soul." Rome's swords cut deep, but faith cuts deeper. Cheers erupted. Some wept. Others clasped hands, sharing glances that spoke volumes. "We are still here." But not everyone shared the joy. In a darkened chamber far from the celebration, Governor Lucius nursed his pride and his wounds. His armor, once gleaming, bore dents from the unexpected resistance. "A setback," he growled to his captain. "Nothing more." Rome's might had faltered, but Rome never forgot. "They think this is victory?" His lips curled into a sneer. "Faith doesn't stop legions." Yet back in the village, it wasn't legions that concerned the people. It was legacy. Lydia gathered survivors that night beneath a starlit sky. Candles flickered between them, casting warm glows on faces etched with exhaustion and hope. "Bartholomew died believing this would happen," she said. "Not the battle, the revival." Cassius added, "His blood didn't soak these stones in vain." A young boy piped up, "Will they come back?" Silence followed. Polemius finally spoke. Rome doesn't forget defiance, but neither do we forget courage. Plans formed. Messengers were dispatched to surrounding villages, carrying news of the stand against oppression. The story of Bartholomew's flaying and the movement it birthed spread faster than Roman horses could chase. Converts multiplied. Hidden churches blossomed. Hymns once whispered now filled marketplaces. Fear loosened its grip. Faith tightened its hold. One evening, Cassius and Lydia climbed a hillside overlooking the town. Lanterns dotted the streets below, flickering like stars fallen to earth. Cassius sighed. "I never thought I'd see this." Lydia smiled. "A city battered, but unbroken." He glanced at her. "You think Bartholomew's watching?" Eyes glistening, she whispered, "He's in every prayer, every song, every act of kindness that defies fear." As the wind stirred the grass, they sat in silence. Hearts full, burdens shared. Below, children's laughter echoed. Somewhere, a hymn drifted upward. Love never breaks. Truth never dies. And as stars glimmered overhead, one truth remained undeniable. Bartholomew's body had fallen. His skin had been torn, his voice silenced by blades. Yet his legacy, unflayed, unbroken, unforgettable. Empires could threaten, swords could slash, fires could burn. But faith endured. And Armenia, once shrouded in fear, now stood illuminated by a light no darkness could snuff out. The days following the siege unfolded like the slow exhale after a held breath. Armenia's streets, once soaked with blood, now pulsed with renewed purpose. Where fires had consumed homes, hands worked tirelessly to rebuild. Laughter, though cautious, returned to the markets. But beneath the surface lay a constant awareness. Rome would not accept defeat so easily. Lydia moved through the town square, her steps light despite the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Children greeted her with smiles, offering wildflowers they'd gathered from the outskirts. "He would have loved this," she whispered, thinking of Bartholomew, the man whose death had become a foundation for their new faith. Cassius, arm still bandaged, stood by a group of volunteers reinforcing the town walls. "They held once," he muttered, inspecting the repairs. "But Rome doesn't knock twice, they kick down doors." Despite the warning, his tone carried a hint of pride. They had faced the lion and survived its roar. Polemius convened a gathering that evening under the glow of lanterns strung between battered buildings. Villagers, merchants, and newly converted believers filled the square. "We've won a battle," the king addressed them, "but not the war. Rome's shadow stretches long. We must be ready." A voice from the crowd called, "We have no army to face another legion." Polemius nodded. "True, but our strength isn't in swords. It's in unity, in truth." His gaze swept across the faces illuminated by flickering light. Bartholomew didn't fight with blades. He fought with love. And that's why we stand here today. Lydia stepped forward. "The message he died for spreads beyond our borders. Already, travelers speak of faith igniting in distant villages." Cassius added, "And that scares Rome more than any army ever could." The council discussed fortifications, alliances, and contingency plans. Yet, through it all, the heart of the conversation remained clear. This was about preserving the truth Bartholomew had carried to their land, truth that no empire could crush. As night deepened, Lydia found herself alone at the edge of the town overlooking the valley. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying distant scents of ash and wildflowers. She knelt, pressing a hand to the earth. "You planted seeds in blood," she murmured, "and they're growing." Footsteps approached. Cassius. "Couldn't sleep either." She shook her head. "Too much to think about." He settled beside her. "Funny how one man's death can change everything." Lydia glanced at him. It wasn't just his death. It was how he faced it, with peace, with purpose. Cassius sighed. "I was a soldier for Rome. Thought strength was in force. Turns out, it's in standing for something bigger than yourself." They sat in silence, the vastness of the night sky stretching above them. Stars like pinpricks of hope against a canvas of darkness. In the weeks that followed, messengers arrived from neighboring regions. Reports of underground churches forming, converts multiplying, and faith spreading faster than fear. Rome sent warnings. Believers responded with prayers. Persecution intensified, but so did courage. Cassius and Lydia traveled from village to village, encouraging new believers. In every place they visited, stories emerged of miracles, of mercy, of men and women willing to risk everything for the truth Bartholomew had preached. One evening, gathered with a small group in a remote hamlet, a young woman asked, "Why did he come here, knowing he'd die?" Lydia smiled gently. "Because love goes where it's needed, not where it's safe." And as the community joined in song, voices rising into the cool night air, the legacy of Bartholomew's sacrifice echoed through hills and valleys, an anthem Rome could never silence. Empires threatened, armies advanced, but the truth marched on. Weeks melted into months, yet the embers of Bartholomew's sacrifice burned hotter than ever. Across Armenia, whispers turned to proclamations. Secret meetings evolved into open gatherings, and the once hidden faith now pulsed in the streets, markets, and homes. Rome's warnings echoed, but the people's courage spoke louder. Cassius adjusted the worn strap of his satchel, glancing toward Lydia as they trekked along a dirt road toward another village. "Think the rumors are true?" he asked. "That the governor's demanding Rome send reinforcements?" Lydia shrugged. "Rome can send armies. It won't stop what started." Her eyes scanned the horizon. Fields of golden wheat swayed in the wind, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Their destination, a modest village nestled at the base of rolling hills, buzzed with anticipation. Word of Cassius and Lydia's arrival had spread days before. Believers gathered in a clearing, faces eager yet cautious. Among them stood Mara, an elderly woman whose eyes shone with fervor. "You carry Bartholomew's words," she said, reaching for Lydia's hand. "He spoke truth that freed us." Cassius glanced around, noting the mixed expressions. Joy mingled with fear. "You know Rome won't let this stand," he cautioned. A young man stepped forward. "We're prepared. Better to die free in truth than live bound in lies." Lydia smiled. That's the heart Bartholomew carried. His sacrifice wasn't meant to inspire fear, but faith. As twilight painted the sky with hues of amber and crimson, villagers lit lanterns, gathering in a circle. Songs rose, soft but unyielding. Children nestled beside parents, elderly clasped weathered hands, and Cassius found himself humming along. Memories of battle replaced with notes of peace. But peace proved fleeting. By dawn, the distant thrum of hooves shattered the tranquility. Dust billowed along the main road as Roman banners crested the hills. Lydia's heart clenched. They came faster than we thought. Cassius scanned the crowd. "Get the children to safety. We'll stall them." Soldiers poured into the village square. At their helm rode a new figure, Legate Marcus Valen, his gaze sharp as his blade. "This ends now," he declared. "Disperse, renounce this false god, or face Rome's wrath." Silence stretched. Then Mara stepped forward. "Your threats mean nothing. Bartholomew's blood speaks louder than your commands." Valen's jaw tightened. "Arrest her!" Soldiers surged forward, but Cassius intercepted, raising his arms. "We stand together. You'll have to take us all." Lydia added, "Rome can chain bodies, but not truth." Tension snapped like a drawn bowstring. Shouts erupted, villagers forming a protective ring around one another. Valen's patience frayed. "Enough! Make an example of them!" Spears lifted, yet before the command could drop, a horn blared from the hills. Heads whipped toward the sound. Another group, travelers and converts from neighboring regions, flooded the field, outnumbering the Romans. Valen's expression darkened. "What is this?" Cassius smirked. "The result of trying to bury a seed. You forgot. It grows." Realizing the tide had turned, Valen barked a retreat order. Roman forces pulled back, jeers following them. The villagers stood breathless, victory not through violence, but through unity. That night, flames danced in celebration. Lydia found herself beside Cassius beneath the stars. "Do you think he sees this?" she whispered. Cassius nodded. Bartholomew didn't die to be remembered. He died so this could live. Across the valleys and peaks, word spread like wildfire. Rome had been challenged, and faith had prevailed. Empires faltered, armies withdrew, but truth advanced, unstoppable and eternal. The dust from the Roman retreat still hung in the air, yet in Armenia's villages hope blazed brighter than ever. Victory, against all odds, had not come from swords or strategies, but from a united people standing for an unshakable truth. Bartholomew's sacrifice, meant to extinguish the movement, had instead lit a fire that no empire could smother. Cassius paced along the village perimeter, scanning the hills. "They'll be back," he muttered. "Rome doesn't take defeat lightly." Lydia joined him, gaze steady. "We prepare hearts, not walls. That's what Bartholomew would say." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, walls wouldn't hurt either." In the village square, King Polemius addressed the gathering crowd. His voice, though weary, resonated with conviction. "We stood together and Rome fled. Not because we fought with steel, but with truth. But this is no end, only a beginning." Murmurs rippled. Some faces held joy, others fear. Victory brought relief, but also the weight of what might come next. That night, Lydia gathered with a group of believers beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient tree. Lanterns cast soft glows, illuminating faces etched with fatigue and hope. "Bartholomew came knowing he'd die," she began, "but he believed one death could spark countless lives changed. Look around. He was right." Cassius added, "We can't let fear creep back in. Rome's shadow looms, but so does the light of what's growing here." News soon spread beyond Armenia's borders. Messengers carried stories of the stand against Rome, of Bartholomew's unwavering faith, and of the movement flourishing despite oppression. Communities hundreds of miles away began holding gatherings, inspired by the courage of Armenia's believers. In response, Rome's fury intensified. Edicts were issued, denouncing the dangerous sect. Troops mobilized. Governors demanded loyalty, threatening severe consequences for any who embraced the teachings of Jesus. But for every threat, more voices rose in defiance. Back in Armenia, Lydia sat with Cassius beneath a blanket of stars. "Do you think Bartholomew imagined this?" she whispered. Cassius chuckled softly. He followed a man who walked on water and defeated death. I think he expected the impossible. Their conversation was interrupted by a rider galloping into the village square. Dust and sweat covered him. "Rome's sending a legion," he gasped. "Thousands. They'll be here within days." Silence fell like a heavy shroud. Cassius stood, jaw tightening. Then we stand again. Polemius convened a council at dawn. "We cannot face Rome with numbers," one elder argued. "They'll crush us." "But they can't crush what's inside us," Lydia countered. "They tried with Bartholomew. Look where we are now." Preparations began, not of weapons, but of words. Villagers practiced hymns, children memorized scripture, and homes opened to travelers seeking truth. The town's heartbeat became one of faith, not fear. Cassius found Lydia at the edge of the village that evening, watching the horizon. "We might die," he said. She nodded. "We might live. Either way, truth marches on." As darkness enveloped the land, believers gathered in the square, candles flickering like stars fallen to earth. Voices lifted in song, soft, yet powerful. And somewhere, beyond the reach of Rome's banners and blades, Bartholomew's legacy pulsed stronger than ever. Empires threatened, legions advanced. But the people? The people stood, unyielding, unafraid, unbroken. And as dawn crept over the hills, casting golden light on the valley below, it illuminated not just a village, but a revolution of the soul. The days leading to Rome's return felt stretched, suspended between breathless calm and inevitable chaos. Villagers worked tirelessly, not to sharpen blades but to fortify hearts. Every home became a sanctuary, every field a meeting place for whispered prayers. Fear walked among them, but so did something stronger, faith that refused to yield. Cassius stood at the village outskirts, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson, a beautiful prelude to what promised to be a harrowing day. Lydia approached, cloak billowing in the morning breeze. "They'll arrive before midday," she said softly. Cassius nodded. "We've done what we can." Lydia glanced back at the village square, where children practiced hymns and elders recited Bartholomew's words. They chose faith over fear. And then the ground began to tremble. Hooves drummed against the earth, a relentless cadence that sent flocks scattering and hearts racing. Dust clouds rose as Rome's might approached, armored legions stretching far beyond what anyone had expected. At the forefront rode Legate Marcus Valens, his gaze hard and unyielding. "This ends today," he muttered to his captains. "No more defiance." The villagers gathered in the square, Polemius standing at their head. His daughter clutched his hand, eyes wide but resolute. Cassius and Lydia flanked him, ready to face whatever storm arrived. Valens dismounted, armor gleaming beneath the harsh sun. "Last chance," he called out, voice echoing across the crowd. "Renounce this so-called faith. Submit to Rome." Silence answered. Then Lydia stepped forward. "We serve a king higher than Caesar." Valens' jaw tightened. "So be it." He raised his hand, and from the villagers rose song. Soft at first, then swelling. Voices layered, harmonies weaving through the air, wrapping around soldiers like an invisible shield. Love never breaks. Truth never dies. The same hymn Bartholomew had sung through agony now thundered across the square. The Roman soldiers hesitated, their disciplined ranks faltering under the unexpected defiance. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Hadn't these people faced enough? Why weren't they afraid? Valen's face darkened with fury. "Silence them!" But before swords could swing, a shout rang out from the Roman ranks. A centurion stepped forward, helmet tucked beneath his arm. I was there," he said, voice shaking. "I saw Bartholomew's execution, and I heard him sing. I thought it madness, but now—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Now, I think it was something else. Something real." Gasps rippled through both armies and villagers alike. Valen glared at the centurion. "Traitor!" Cassius stepped forward. "You can't kill a truth that's already taken root in hearts." Valen's fury boiled over. "Then hearts will bleed." He raised his sword, only for Polemius to step between him and the villagers. "If blood must be spilled," the king said, "take mine. Spare them." A tense beat passed. Then Valen lowered his blade, chest heaving. "Fools," he spat. "You think you've won? Rome remembers. Rome returns." With that, he turned sharply. "Withdraw." Soldiers filed out, dust swirling in their wake. Relief flooded the villagers, but so did realization. This was a reprieve, not an end. That evening, fires crackled as survivors shared stories and prayers. Cassius found Lydia at the village edge, staring at the stars. "He'd be proud," he said, and she nodded. "Not of what we did, of what we stood for." Across Armenia, word spread like wildfire. Rome had come, and left empty-handed. Bartholomew's legacy had outlasted blades, threats, and legions. Empires roared. Truth stood. And somewhere, beyond mortal sight, a martyr's soul smiled. The revolution of the heart had only just begun. Weeks passed since the Roman legions withdrew, yet the echoes of their march still lingered in the minds of Armenia's people. The threat of Rome remained, a shadow that loomed beyond the hills, but fear no longer ruled the hearts of the believers. Bartholomew's sacrifice had not only withstood the empire's fury, it had ignited an unstoppable movement. Lydia stood in the village square as morning light bathed the stone streets. Children chased one another between rebuilt homes, their laughter mingling with the soft notes of a hymn hummed by passers-by. Life had returned, not as it was before, but stronger, rooted in truth that no blade could sever. Cassius approached, a scroll in hand. Words spreading faster than we can travel. Villages far beyond the mountains are gathering in his name. He handed the parchment to Lydia. Names, places, and messages of hope scrawled across it. They say Bartholomew's death planted seeds across the land. Lydia smiled, reading the accounts. Healings, conversions, families restored. "He believed this would happen," she murmured. "He knew that one life laid down could awaken many." King Polemius joined them, face lined with both weariness and gratitude. "Rome may return," he warned, "but what we've built here, it's beyond their reach now." Cassius chuckled. "Let them try. They can't fight an idea that lives in every heart." As preparations began for another gathering, messengers arrived from neighboring regions. One carried a carved wooden cross, weathered yet beautiful. "From the believers in the northern villages," the messenger explained, "a gift to honor the man who brought them hope." They placed the cross at the edge of the square, overlooking the valley. Lydia traced her fingers over the wood, a lump forming in her throat. "He faced death without flinching," she whispered, "and gave us courage to live." That evening, under a canopy of stars, the village gathered. Lanterns flickered like fireflies, casting warm light over faces etched with stories of survival and newfound faith. Polemius spoke first. "We stood against an empire. But more importantly, we stood for truth." Lydia stepped forward, voice steady. Bartholomew taught us that love never breaks, that truth never dies, and that darkness, no matter how deep, can't drown the light. A hush settled over the crowd. Then voices rose in song. The same hymn Bartholomew had sung at the hour of his death now swelled with life, echoing through the hills and beyond. Cassius glanced at Lydia. "Think he hears this?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "I think he's part of it." Beyond Armenia's borders, the gospel spread. Travelers carrying stories of the man who faced the blade with peace, who met death with love. Empires wavered, but faith surged. Rome's banners might fly high, but hearts knelt to a greater king. Years later, pilgrims would journey to that village, tracing the path Bartholomew walked, standing where his blood had soaked the earth. They came not to mourn, but to remember, to be inspired. And as the seasons turned, the cross at the valley's edge remained, a symbol not of loss, but of victory, not of an end, but a beginning. Empires crumble, names fade, kings fall, but truth endures, truth sings, truth lives. Bartholomew's voice had been silenced by blades, yet his message, louder than ever, and in the hearts of all who carried it forward, he lived on. You've reached Chapter 6 of our 12-part series. If you're enjoying this biblical deep dive, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Next, in Chapter 7, we cover the tragic fate of Thomas, the apostle best known for his doubts. But in death, his faith was undeniable. Click to watch.